I think it's on away.
Here.
Sorry, we've got 5 minutes.
Okay. Ruth, is Ruth around?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Ruth, can we borrow you a minute?
Do you know that?
They were having them run through it. From on the street.
Is this the same on all of us? Who? Yes, you've got it on the iPad.
After the event on Saturday, sort of
That's the old one, right? Put it on that. There it is. This is it.
So 9:06. That's right, is it? That's right. Yeah. That one's right.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah.
But you've got Curtis Appleby.
Good.
Curtis Appleby.
Oh, thank you.
I'm getting you an age.
Curtis. Curtis Appleby.
Yeah, you sound good, Jamie. Hear me?
Right, we're just going into.
I think it's just Alan.
So,
I've got no idea. Actually, I've got no idea.
To whoever, isn't
Everyone
it?
ready?
Yeah.
Yeah? Anyone got any last minute questions? Last minute toilet trip? Actually, it's too late. Sorry, you just got to Seriously, there will be a short break at 9:30 for news and sport, but it would be better if you could just cross your legs and try and get through to the
Weather. Thank you very much, Michael, and welcome to our simulcast. We like that word, don't we? This is our general election youth debate. We are live at the University of Sunderland and, of course, live on Spark FM and BBC Newcastle Radio for the North East. The weather today, well, you can expect it to be grey, overcast and showery. Plenty of rain around, which will be heavy and persistent at times. Top temperature today, 14 degrees, and it has caused a bit of a nightmare on the roads, Jill.
It certainly has. Very heavy and slow. If you're heading into the tight tunnel, please to say northbound looking easy. So are you guys just picking it up?
I'll pick up off the back of here.
Yep.
We're going to introduce you all in a minute.
You got the script open, Jamie?
And when we introduce the panel, if you could just wait till all of the panel have been introduced and then give them all a big round of applause. Thanks for coming along this morning. Okay.
Someone, Anth or someone should give you one, then you'll know where we're at. Yeah, flag that up to Anth as soon as you can. You need that in front of you.
9 to 10 running order. There's a full script in there. You're supposed to be 6 minutes all up. News, sport and travel. Bex is aware of that. She knows it's supposed to be 6 minutes.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to the University of Sunderland and the David Putnam Media Centre. This is the BBC Newcastle and Spark FM Youth Election Debate, and we're broadcasting live on both radio stations for the next hour.
Yes, in America they call that a simulcast, and I'm going with it because it sounds good. We've got an audience of around 30 young people. I'm definitely the oldest person in the room. I'm like Gandalf here looking out before me. We've got 30 young people, mostly from Sunderland, but some from elsewhere in the North East, and mostly aged between 18 to 24. Give us a cheer, just let me know you're here, guys.
Oh,
that was so pretend you're in America once more with feeling. Good morning. Better. They're ready, they're poised, they want to ask their questions to a panel of politicians from the main parties, all hoping to make their case to young voters and the rest of our listeners with less than 48 hours before the polls open. It's come round very quickly.
It has indeed. And as well as myself and Alfie, we're also joined by our co-presenter, Emma, who presents a mid-morning programme here on Spark FM, and she's going to be co-presenting this hour with us. It's over to you, Emma.
Well, let's introduce the panel. We've got Simon Kitchen representing the Conservative Party. We have Roberta Blackman-Woods representing Labour. Niall Hodgson representing Liberal Democrats. Jonathan Arnott representing UKIP, and Jonathan Elmer representing the Green Party. So let's give them all a big welcome and thanks to them all for coming.
Okay, so time is tight. Lots and lots and lots to get to. So down to business. Let's get this debate started. We've decided to divide it up into a number of themes based on what our young audience has told us actually matters most to them. So we're going to be starting with national security, of course, an issue that has shot up the agenda following the London terror attacks at the weekend and, of course, the dreadful attacks on Manchester. So our first question is from Dom James. Dom is a 21-year-old student.
After the recent events in the past few weeks, what is your party going to do to increase security and make us feel safe?
Simon Kitchen, Conservatives, if you take this one, please, Simon.
Thank you. Well, it's obviously truly upsetting seeing those incidents both in London and in Manchester. I think all of us here travel probably around the UK and will probably been to Manchester Arena. I've certainly been drinking in London Bridge and probably know people who have been there and might even have known people who have been affected. It's particularly disturbing because they were targeting children and young women as well, and it's obviously been caused by an ideology which is just completely the opposite of the things that we value in our society today. In terms of how we make people feel safe, it's this Islamist threat, and I think we need to give it a name. It's Islamist. This is global in nature. We've seen it also came at a time when there were attacks in Kabul as well and in Iraq. So this is something that we are having to deal with across the world, and the Conservative Party has got a series of things in place to be able to try to tackle it. Firstly, we've kept the aid budget at 0.7% of GDP. I think it's important that we're able to support countries like Afghanistan in developing so they're able to take the fight to ISIS and the Islamists in their own country. And it's also important that we maintain our defence budget as well. The Conservatives are committed to spending 2% of GDP, and at the moment we're part of a international coalition fighting ISIS on the ground in Iraq and in Syria as well. So we're taking the fight out there to ISIS and to the ideology.
But what about at home, Simon? All the papers from Pages this morning are saying, we knew one of these attackers, we knew he had this potential, nothing seems to have been done about that. How do we change that? How will your government change that? Do they need to change strategy?
That's a really good question. So we've increased the counter-terrorism budget up to 683 million in our time in government. So we're putting more resources into the security services to be able to respond to this. We developed the Prevent strategy, which was about engaging with communities across the country to be able to identify these extremist individuals. And I think it's important that we're able to, as a party, we've also committed to an actual review of the counter-terrorism process and to set up a task force to see if what we can learn around tackling is extremism as well and having a zero tolerance on extremism.
Roberta Blackman, would you shaking your head there for Labour? What would Labour do differently?
Well, I just want to first, to correct some of the things that Simon's saying, but I also want to start by, sending my huge condolences and thoughts to the families and friends of people who have been affected by those terrorist incidents. It's truly shocking. What we do know that helps in a counter-terrorism strategy is having strong links with both the communities that are supplying the terrorists and those affected by them. And I have to say to you, Simon, the Tories did not set up the Prevent strategy. What they did was change it. Labour set up the Prevent strategy, and it was a grassroots strategy working with a whole range of communities in this country to bring people together, working with neighbourhood policing so there would be clear lines of communication to the police that could be acted on, and of course proper funding of GCHQ. And actually what the coalition government and this government did was cut the funding going to GCHQ, cut the intelligence officers, take lots of police, 20,000 police off our streets, decimate neighbourhood policing. And when you do that, you lose the tools that enable you to have an effective counter-terrorism strategy. So what Labour has said it will do is return Prevent to the sort of programme that it used to be, and that we will put in more intelligence officers and more police on the streets. And that's what we need. But we also need something more, and it's about fostering a climate where we talk about what unites us as a country and what unites us as communities, and not about what simply divides us.
Okay,
Because
to
we have
get
give
through
people
each
a
issue, we're going to have to be a
stake
little
in
bit
this
more
society.
succinct. Okay, we've got lots to get through. Very, very quick reaction from Lib Dems. Niall?
Well, I think one of the things that's certainly come up after London is the response of the police, which was fantastic and extremely fast. It's right, as Roberta says, actually we need much more money going back into community policing, because the police themselves have said that this is where the cuts are really affecting their ability to serve. And what is alarming, of course, is that we're now, at a general election, being asked to put our faith in Theresa May, who is the person who, as Home Secretary, made those cuts to policing and made those cuts to our national security. Her record on this is actually appalling, and it's her who, we should actually be standing in judgment.
Going forward, Jonathan Arnott of UKIP.
I think we are all shocked and saddened by the tragic events that have happened in London and in Manchester. I think we have to do a distinction between the vast majority of peace-loving Muslims in this country and the tiny number, but it is still between 3,000 and 23,000 known to our security services.
So how do you deal with that, Jonathan? How do you deal with it?
Well, first of all, you make sure that you have enough funding for your police, and that's something that UKIP have been saying for a long time. You make sure you fund your police, your security services, and so on. You make sure that those who are the extreme Wahhabists, we stop foreign funding of British mosques, because when you have that funding, then those people generally are choosing the imam and they're choosing the ideology that is behind it. You make sure that those who are the known threats are people who are monitored a lot more closely.
Jonathan Arnott, we're going to have to go to, if we can, go to Jonathan Elmer of the Green Party. We're going to have to interrupt you there and just go to Jonathan Elmer there. We've got a lot to get through, so if we can keep it as succinct as possible, that would be fantastic.
Likewise, I think it's absolutely appalling, the two incidents that have happened very recently. But I'd like to very briefly reflect on the PREVENT strategy. It has, as Roberta said, been considerably altered. And right now, the way it operates is that people within schools, workplaces and communities are encouraged to essentially identify people that they're suspicious of. Now, this has resulted in numerous sort of false allegations, because those people in community schools, workplaces simply have not had the training to identify people that have become radicalised. So it's actually divided communities and stigmatised people and actually had the reverse of the desired effect. So it really does need to be put back together, a model based on community policing, where police officers are actually recruited from within community, so they reflect the ethnic makeup of that community, can work within that community and actually get to understand people.
Okay, I can see people straining in the audience to make their point of view. Is there anything members of the audience have heard that they like or dislike so far from these responses on terrorism and how to tackle it? Yeah, just say your name and your point of view, please.
My name's Daniel Punch. Mine's a question really about the Conservative. How are we supposed to trust Theresa May when you've got a member of the police saying that she's publicly lied about the amount of police officers she's done, when all she's done is taken them from little towns and brought them straight into London? And obviously when the crime happens in that little town, how are they supposed to be protected?
Well, one of the good things that's happened over the last 7 years, alongside obviously the horrendous incidents that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, is that actually crime overall is coming down across the country. So when we, in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, were making difficult decisions about what part of the budgets to protect, obviously we prioritised the NHS to make sure there's proper funding in place, and the Home Office was one of those departments that we actually had to reduce the budget of, given the circumstances that we found ourselves in. I think Theresa May's done an amazing job with the resources that she's been given. She's someone who knows the counter-terrorism brief inside out. She's the person that I would trust implicitly.
Did she make a mistake with those cuts?
She was given the budget that she was given, and she spent the money accordingly. So she increased the budget towards counter-terrorism to prioritise.
So was that a mistake, would you say?
I think she was right to prioritise counter-terrorism. She didn't have a choice about the size of her budget. That was something that was given by the coalition government, given the finances that we were given as a country at the time.
Well, but free terrorist attacks that actually happened when she's in charge. How is that even? How can you condone that? It's made it like better for the country, because under her charge we've had 3 terrorist attacks. and she's cut 20,000 police officers as well. And so it feels like the security of the nation's feeling like, I don't believe that the statistic is going to be less crime when obviously there's been all this obviously this horrible stuff that's happened.
Simon Kitchen, can you very quickly respond to that, because we're going to get onto the NHS very shortly?
I think Theresa May's got an excellent reputation. I think also we need to compare it to Diane Abbott and to Jeremy Corbyn, who proudly said, I've been involved in opposing counter-terrorist legislation ever since I got into Parliament in 1983. So this is the alternative, a man who's taken tremendous pride in opposing every single piece of counter-terrorism legislation that we put forward to try and protect people in this country. So I think Theresa May has got a track record of being really tough, but she's just proposed increasing sentences to those who have got minor terrorist offences to try and keep them off our streets. And that's the person that I would trust.
Very quick comment, Roberta Blackman-Woods. I could just hear you muttering.
Well, I just think it's pathetic to have that sort of response. Theresa May was responsibility for security. She opposed a lot of that counter-terrorism legislation in exactly the same way that Jeremy Corbyn did. And it was not because he was wanting us to be soft on terrorists. It was because some of the civil liberties issues around that I didn't agree with him.
Is he soft on terrorists?
Absolutely not.
Do lots of the public think he is?
He made a really strong statement on Sunday after that terrible atrocity in London, making it very clear
So why
that
do people keep bringing up the IRA, and why do people keep saying he's soft on terrorists?
Because they want to have a go at him, and they're looking at things from years and years and years ago. I think as Theresa May was responsible for our security, the focus and the spotlight should be on her and her record, and she wasn't strong enough to argue in Cabinet for the resources she needed to keep the country safe.
OK, so we're now going to move on to the NHS. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's coming up on 9:17 right now. Thank you for joining us. It's Alfie and Anna. We're coming live from the University of Sunderland with help from our co-presenter Emma here, and we're simulcasting on Spark FM. So let's move on to another huge issue that the young people in our audience wanted to ask about, and that is the future of the NHS. We're going to take a question now from Jack Kelly. He's a lifeguard and a teacher from Sunderland. Jack, where are you and what did you want to ask the panel? There you are. What do you want to ask them?
If the Conservatives were in power, how real is the threat of privatisation within the NHS?
Simon Kitchen,
It's very easy to answer that. We have absolutely no plans at all to privatise the NHS. This is scaremongering from the Labour Party. They bring it out every election. When they're scared they're going to lose, they say the Conservatives are going to privatise the NHS, and we never do it, and we never will do. I'll give you some very good reasons. I use the NHS. My family have health conditions. My dad had cancer, and he wouldn't have been able to get the treatments that he needed to be able to save his life had it not been for the NHS. And the vast majority of Conservatives of that mindset as well. We need the NHS like anyone else, and we don't want to see it privatised. So,
Jonathan Elmer of the Green Party, you're shaking your head.
I'm just astonished by what's just been said. We just need to look at the 2012 Health and Social Care Act, which the purpose of which was to progress the privatisation of the NHS, to introduce an internal market within the NHS. In fact, the administration of competition within the NHS costs between £4.5 and £10 billion a year in itself. That's to enable private markets to get a better foothold within the NHS. So what the Conservative candidate has just said, I find astonishing when legislation has actually been passed to enable privatisation to move forwards.
We've had quite a few people having a go at Simon Kitchen. I know we've got people in the audience who do reflect the views of the Conservative Party. I think Edward is in the audience. Can we get a mic to Edward,
Edward
please?
and George here, just here on the front row. Excellent.
Edward, what do you think about the Conservatives and the NHS? Do you trust them?
I do trust them. Obviously, I myself have had my whole life in the NHS. My family have. We've had conditions as well, and we've had a very successful time with them. I do believe going forward long term, and this is my views as an individual, not just as a supporter of the Conservative Party, that maybe parts of the NHS could be privatised. But the NHS as a whole, since the Second World War, we've had this great institution, which we all believe in as a country, and that's something across all parties. And I believe as long as it maintains its free nature, generally, then yeah, I support it.
Simon, how much investment are the Tories going to make, and does that match what Simon Stevens said is needed? Other parties are committing a lot more than you in their manifesto.
Well, we're committed to an extra £8 billion real-term increases in the NHS budget. In Newcastle East, which I'm representing at this general election, the hospitals there are currently outstanding. We've seen over the coalition government and under the Conservative government, we've seen staff levels increasing to record levels. So I think the NHS is safe in our hands. And something that I feel very passionate about is mental health. And one of the things we are bringing in is increasing the mental health budget. It's currently over 10 billion, which is the highest amount ever. We want to take it, add an extra billion to that by 2021. Also creating programmes around educating teachers and understanding and appreciating mental health, so it's easier for children.
And yet at the minute,
kids to be
Simon
able to
Kitchen,
have
people are waiting between 6, 8 and 18 months for an appointment, for a mental health appointment. Niall Horan, you've been shaking your head there from the Lib Dems. Let's hear from you, your perspective.
Thank you for calling me Niall Horan. It's nice to be mistaken for him.
Hodgson, of course, Hodgson.
On this point of mental health care, yes, absolutely. I think one of the key Liberal Democrat pledges is to make sure that waiting times for mental health are brought in line with those for physical health. But I did want to pick up on something Simon said actually about staff. One of the many reasons that the NHS is in a state of crisis is that we're struggling with staff retention. The issues about people, particularly nurses, coming in is very, very troubling. Liberal Democrats want to reinstate bursaries for nurses and midwives, which must be done urgently. But an alarming thing about the current situation is that we stand to potentially lose thousands of NHS staff who are EU citizens if Brexit goes ahead. And there is nothing in the pipeline to actually tackle that problem.
Jonathan Arnott, UKIP, what do UKIP promise to deliver when it comes to the NHS?
OK, well, first of all, to respond to that, nobody is suggesting that anyone from the EU who's working in our NHS or social care should leave the UK. So that's just complete false flag argument. Two things that we would do. Firstly is about the funding, making sure that we've got an extra £9 billion a year for the NHS by the end of the next Parliament. The other side of the coin is making sure that you've got a strategy in place to recruit the staff that you need. So you start off by removing the government's artificial cap on medical school places and stop turning away 800 straight A students from medical schools every year. Make sure that we're paying the entire tuition fees for medical school students, provided that they're actually working in our NHS once they're qualified. We've got to then make it easier for GPs who've left to return to practice. You have to make sure that you've got root and branch reform of all these things. It's one after another little step in the right direction to make sure that you get the people who we need qualified and working in our NHS. And then, of course, with mental health, we've got to make sure that we fund mental health properly. It's been forgotten by so many governments for far, far, far too long. And when you're talking about an average 18-week wait for a first appointment, you know what that's going to cause. It's going to cause people to descend into crisis and cause even bigger problems. So we need to make sure that nobody waits more than 28 days, and preferably an awful lot less, for an appointment within the mental health system, because that is something which causes massive problems in our society.
I can see someone with the hand up there. What's your point?
Hi, so it's the UKIP candidate, hello. You're making some very strong promises, but how exactly do you plan to fund this? The Lib Dems have promised to put a penny in the pound on taxes. Labour have a fully costed manifesto. You're making good promises, but how do we know that you would come through with them?
Well, our manifesto is fully costed. I mean, if you look at Labour's manifesto, by the way, there's a whole load of things in there that they haven't costed, and they're making all sorts of claims for raising money that won't actually raise what they say. What UKIP has said very clearly is that we'll end the 0.7% target for overseas aid, and that will save between 9 and 11 billion a year by the end of the Parliament, depending on exactly where the economy is by then, and that is the money that we're going to put directly into our NHS to help people in the UK.
We've got another hand up here in the front row. Would you like to go back to that one?
Hi there, my name's George Reid. Is it not a wider theme with this general election that it is the Conservative Party, which is the only party willing to really make the tough decisions in terms of funding, so they don't saddle our children with the debt of yesterday?
Roberta Blackman-Woods?
Well, first of all, you're settling young people with a lot of debt through tuition fees, but I'm sure we'll get on to that later. Look, Labour have fully costed our manifesto commitments, and one of the first things that we want to do is repeal the Health and Social Care Act. That is really important because, as Jonathan Elmer said, it's put us on a pathway for privatisation of the NHS, and I see it every day in my constituency. Staff doing a really, really wonderful job in unnecessarily difficult circumstances because they're not being resourced properly, and we are under-doctored. So it is simply not true that the number of staff are increasing. We do have to do something about student bursaries for the NHS, but we've got to get rid of the Health and Social Care Act that is putting money into privatisation. And by the way, also what the Tories are doing is taking away all the key targets, so and taking away information. So it's actually quite difficult for us to find out what's going on in the NHS. I think you should all be angry about that, and we should all be demanding that the NHS is fully accountable and that the targets are met and that it's properly resourced. And you know what? Most people would pay more money to see our NHS funded properly.
Very quickly, Jonathan from the Green Party.
Just want a quick word on the fact that not everything is suitable for privatisation. The NHS in particular is totally unsuited to privatisation, simply because, think of it from the perspective of a GP treating a patient. That patient perhaps is a paying patient. If the GP makes that patient better in the long term, then they've actually stopped their income from that person. So not everything works very well with privatisation, and making people better, healthy, is seriously not one of those things.
By 2020, for the North East, there's £1 billion worth of savings planned. How on earth do we plan to do that whilst keeping services at the standard that they're at, or getting services better? We'll go to you, Roberta Blackman-Woods, there.
Well, the transformation plans, a misnomer, by the way, that should actually be plan to cut services drastically in the North East, is essentially a set of plans that are about reconfiguring services, and people are going to find that they have to wait longer for services, they have to travel further to get the particular specialism or treatment that they need. We need to get rid of these and have a proper assessment of the healthcare that we all want to see for a 21st century country. The NHS is one of the best healthcare systems in the whole world. We should be a champion for our NHS and not trying to turn it into some cheap aping of the American system that fails loads and loads of people.
So under Labour government, there won't be bed closures in Rothbury, there won't be queues at walk-in centres?
I think what we have said is that we will resource the NHS properly, we will get rid of the Health and Social Care Act, and we want to have what will genuinely be a review of services to deliver for communities and to have some local accountability back into the system.
Can we very quickly just go to an audience member here?
My name's Ashton Brown. I have a question for Simon Kitchen. A colleague of yours, Robert Oliver, suggested that the NHS failures were due to the staff. Is your government neglecting its responsibilities to the NHS?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, absolutely. So Robert Oliver, the councillor, he's a member of the Conservative Party. He alleged the other day in an election debate similar to this that it was the staff that were responsible for the NHS failures. Is your government neglecting its responsibilities to the NHS?
Well, it's a slightly leading question there. Of course, it's not the staff's fault. I mean, you're going to get good and bad staff in every organisation and so forth, but the NHS depends upon its staff.
Simon, we'll come to this after the news. We've got to hit the news on time because we're broadcasting on both Spark FM and BBC Newcastle Radio for the North East. It's 9:30.
Bit of a curveball, yes.
I'm so sorry.
That was great, guys. Sorry, we had to, because it's a dual broadcast, we had to go bang on 9:30, otherwise everything would have collapsed.
That's all right.
Spark FM and BBC Newcastle come together to present a general election debate special. We're here live from the University of Sunderland. Thank you very much for having us here as your guests from BBC Newcastle.
Yeah, and just before we went to the news, we had an audience member ask a question. Simon Kitchen from the Conservatives was halfway through answering that question, so I think we're going to go back to answering that question. Can you just give us the question?
Well, I'll repeat the question.
Yeah,
was about the importance of staff for the NHS, and it did crop up in one of the TV debates recently that nurses hadn't had a pay rise in however many years. How important are staff, NHS staff, for the Conservative Party? Simon Kitchen.
Well, they're fundamental to the working of the NHS. All of us depend upon the staff and the nurses, the doctors, and also perhaps the less celebrated support staff behind them, the administrative support and so forth to make the NHS work. I've got many nurses and doctors in the family, so I kind of see the long hours people work, and also working in the NHS very much as a vocation as well. It's something that people go to find a calling to go to do. So that's why obviously funding the NHS and putting the extra £8 billion in.
So the Tories, like everyone, value the staff. Of course, everybody's going to answer the same in that way, that you value the staff. Jonathan Narnock, you had your hand held up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just about finding the extra funding for the NHS. It's also making sure that the money that you do spend is going in the right direction. So you've got to start making sure that your healthcare system works and is integrated with your social care system, so you don't have 35,000 bed days being lost every single month because you don't have the social care available. You have to make sure that you do something with efficiency. You have to talk about the NHS is spending roughly £600 million a year on consultancy fees.
Listen, we'll leave it there. Because people are just tuning in, we'll reintroduce everyone. It's Alfie and Anna from BBC Newcastle. It's Emma from Spark FM. And around the table, in front of our live studio audience, we've got Simon Kitchen from the Conservative Party, Roberta Blackman-Woods from the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats represented by Niall Hodson, and we've got Jonathan Arnott from UKIP and Jonathan Elmer from the Green Party, and a live studio audience who've been whipped into a frenzy. Welcome back. OK, let's move on to our next subject, which is education.
Yeah, we've got a question from George Reid, who's a student from Newcastle. George, what would you like to ask our panel?
How can the Labour Party make the impossible commitment to abolish tuition fees in the context of crumbling public services?
Roberta Blackman-Woods from the Labour Party, please respond.
Look, we're really pleased about this commitment to young people, and actually I think the Labour Party is the only party with a manifesto that has a positive vision for the future of the country and for our young people. We think it's really important to invest in young people, and that's why Jeremy has made such a strong commitment to abolishing tuition fees. But we're going beyond that. We're going to reinstate the Educational Maintenance Allowance so young people can take up opportunities both at school and at college. And we're also saying that we should get rid of unpaid internships, because we think, particularly over a long period of time, if people are employing a young person, then they should be paid for it.
This sounds like the land of milk and honey. Have you got a magic money tree? Where is all this money coming from?
Well, Labour is the only party that has set out in detail how it's going to fund its manifesto commitments, and we've been very clear.
You've got a massive black hole from your nationalisation programme.
Absolutely, that is not the case. And you know,
where's your 70 or 80 billion
in this
coming
election,
from?
it's very interesting how the Labour Party is being attacked for its figures. At least it's put them forward. The other parties haven't done that, and they can
look at the back of our manifesto. It's there for you, Kit. Very clear.
To answer the question, it's very clear how we're going to fund the tuition fee pledge and give opportunities to young people. But we want to go more than that, because young people need to have a future in employment. We want to have high quality, high skilled jobs. We have talked about how we're going to put money into the North East economy, into our infrastructure.
Can I just stop you there so I can go to a question from the audience, Roberta?
In a globalised market.
Can I just stop you there so we can go to a question to fire back, please?
Yeah, so I'm Sophie Dishman. I come from a low-income family, and I can't afford to go on placement and go to work experience in London. Is your party going to fund universities for this specific purpose?
Yes, and what we have said is that particularly where there are courses also that have some practical element to them, that needs to be included in the overall package that's on offer to students. And it's because we think that young people have had such a raw deal from this Conservative government that we have come up with a package of measures that try and support young people, not only with education, but with housing too, so that you see you have a real future and a positive future ahead of you.
More hands up on this subject than any other subject so far, for obvious reasons. For the Green Party, Jonathan, you've got your hand up. What do you want to say?
I just want to take on this issue of the magic money tree, where you use that word as a host. Actually, it's a term that the Conservatives have injected in into this campaign to give people the impression that there is no money out there. We are actually one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Now, I'd like to make the point that the reason there is very little money for public spending is not because the money isn't there within this country, it's because it's locked away. So the process over the last 7 or 8 years has been one of essentially raising levels of income tax for poorer people, transferring the burden of taxation so there's more on poorer people, less wealthy people, in order to pay for tax reductions to the very wealthy. We can see what's happened with levels of corporation tax and capital gains tax, for example, and the amount of money that's still locked away in tax havens that the government is doing nothing about whatsoever. Now, come on, if those issues were tackled, there would be money to pay for these public services.
I think we can go to the audience. We've got a question from the audience who'd like to come back at that one.
Yep, Matthew Giles. We've heard about some of the parties wanting to abolish student fees. What about graduates who have a debt around their neck, basically? What will the parties do to help people who have already graduated for universities and have to pay astronomical fees?
Bringing everything into line is going to be tricky. Let's go to the Lib Dems. Niall, of course, your tuition fee stance was highlighted massively at the last election. Where are you at now?
Well, like many people, I have tuition fee debt. Mine was granted to me by the Labour Party, which introduced tuition fees and trebled them. But I think one of the things that the current system...
Sorry, not as much as you did. There's a huge difference between £3,000 and £9,000.
There's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between no tuition fees and tuition fees, which is what Labour started.
It's not the policy now, though.
But I think it's very unfair to suggest that Labour have clean hands on this. And I think particularly what is, aside from the fantasy economics of Labour's position, the reason it's unfair is that tuition fees advantage middle-class students. They're not fair to disadvantaged students because the problem actually is maintenance, not tuition fees. Tuition fees under the current system, you don't pay anything back until you're earning £21,000 a year. Universities are free at the point of access. I think that's reasonable to expect people to pay money back as a graduate. What I don't think is fair is that we've lost maintenance so that poorer students, they might be able to get into university, but they aren't supported while they study. And that's what the Liberal Democrats are trying to bring back with our manifesto.
Another question from the audience.
Yeah, there's a lot of people talking about current students and graduates, but what about those young people who never go to university? Who go out to work from a young age, pay taxes? Why should they have to pay for other people for that privilege of going to university? Like, why should my taxes pay for other people to go to university? Surely they should. I can understand why people would be selling that to try and win votes from students, but actually there's a lot of young people who this policy just doesn't apply to at all.
Can we go to Jonathan from the Green Party, because you look really eager to answer this one?
Yeah, I just think we need to reflect on the point of taxation and the idea that we have collective responsibility as taxpayers for vulnerable people and people in need, and to provide everybody with equal opportunities across society. What we're seeing right now is a move towards individuals being isolated. So you're having to pay for your own education, you're having to pay for your own health. Pensioners having to cover the costs associated with care when they have Alzheimer's, things like that. We've moved away from the idea that we look after each other as a society. Certainly within the Green Party, we'd very much like to move back in that direction. And it does relate to what the questioner was asking there, because it's the same. University shouldn't be a privilege. It should be something that is actually accessible to all people, regardless of their background. But what we're actually seeing is an education system structured whereby essentially you have to be privileged even to get to a decent school, not to mention university, hence the introduction of grammar schools.
Jonathan Almer, we're going to just cut you there for a second because we're running out of time. I think we're going to go to UKIP now, to Jonathan Arnott.
OK, well, first of all, you're absolutely right to say that we're not thinking enough about people who don't go to university. And in fact, one of the big problems for people of my generation, people in their 30s now, is that because of the 50% target of trying to push more and more and more people into going to university, more people than there are graduate level jobs, there are people then coming out of university getting jobs that they could have got without having gone to university in the first place, but then saddled with £40,000 to £50,000 of debt that they are now struggling for the rest of their lives to repay. So we need to think about that target and actually start to think about matching the students to actually what we need in industry a little bit more as well. We would restore grants for the poorest students, but let's be honest, there isn't enough money at the moment.
You want grammar schools as well, don't you?
We would start with the STEM subject.
OK, there we are. A round of applause for that. Roberta Blackman-Woods for the Labour Party.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Labour's offer isn't only about university students, it's also about apprenticeships and it's about college courses as well, because we recognise we need a wide range of opportunities for young people, whatever course they want to follow in life. And we most certainly would not be wasting money on grammar schools, which are divisive, are shown to be ineffective in terms of social mobility, and we've got a strong argument for funding all of our schools properly, because what's happening under this government is that in my constituency schools are losing between £360 and £980 per pupil. That is no way to build an education system to serve our needs for the future.
Can we just throw back to the audience? We've got a question at the back there.
Hi, Beth King. So you've said you've got a clear stance on how you're going to abolish the fees. Where would the money come from to abolish uni tuitions? It's £30 billion. Like, that's a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, the two main planks of additional funding that Labour have identified is putting up corporation tax for big business and to clamp down on tax evasion, because a lot of big businesses manage not to pay the taxes that they should do, and also taxing people who earn £80,000 or more money. So we've been pretty clear about how we're going to fund it.
Throughout history, those kinds of policies never raise whatever you claim them to raise. So you're not going to raise the money to be able to do it.
Well, we have aspiration. We are not doing.
Of course, you have aspiration, but don't sell people snake oil here and tell them that those things will bring the money in.
You have to set out your policies. You fund them. That's it.
And you have to find costings that actually make sense. That's why you have the magic money tree argument. You'll not be able to argue those things about the costings in our manifesto. I'll tell you that.
OK, I think we've got another question.
Look at our manifesto, just read the
You're
back.
talking to each other now and not to the audience. I think we've got one more question on education at the front there. Someone got the hand up there at the front. Just behind. Here we are.
Hi, it's Ed again. So my point is, if Labour are voted in and tuition fees are scrapped, surely less people will actually be able to go to university, because if the government are paying for university, universities will have limits on how many people they can take, whereas at the moment, everyone has the opportunity to go to university. Why would I, as a voter, not want that to happen?
Actually, everyone does not have the opportunity to go to university at the moment. I speak to a lot of young people in my constituency and wider, because I chair the Parliamentary University Group, who are simply put off by the level of debt. And if they don't have, or their parents are not able to give them a lot of financial support, they do think differently about going to university. So what we want to do in Labour is extend opportunity and give all young people who would benefit from university the right to go there.
OK, we're going to change subjects now, and we could probably use up the rest of our time on education, but I think we're going to move to Brexit, and a big subject for this part of the country. We know from the referendum day. But what's your point in the audience over there? Introduce yourself, if you would.
Hello, Curtis Appleby. Why is your party leader the best person to guide us through Brexit, ensuring the free movement of people is stopped, because that is what the British people voted for?
No, they didn't.
OK, sorry, who said no they didn't?
Well, I said, I mean...
that's Niall, Liberal Democrats. OK, you just make your point.
So the British people voted in a referendum to leave the European Union. Nowhere on that ballot paper was leaving the single market, and nowhere was ending freedom of movement. In fact... In fact, during the debate in the run-up to that referendum, we were hearing from Nigel Farage and the right wing of the Tory party saying we're going to have a Norwegian or a Swiss model of membership, which would mean remaining in the single market, protecting freedom of movement. That's what we have in those countries. What we're talking about for the United Kingdom now is this mad, hard Brexit, which leaves us completely isolated in Europe. And I think that sort of level of isolation is crazy. And Tim Farron, to answer your question, is one of the few people who is actually saying that. And it's not a popular thing to say. It is a difficult thing to say. But I think you have to respect a party that is taking such a firm line and sticking to its principles through, and taking quite a lot of stick for them.
Almost a clap. Almost a clap. Jonathan Arnott, obviously UKIP got what they wanted out of this, but what do they want from Brexit next?
Absolutely. Well, what we need to make sure, firstly, is that we have control of our borders, because that is something that you could not possibly do without leaving the European Union in the first place. And contrary to what the Lib Dems are saying, UKIP were absolutely clear. Vote Leave were absolutely clear. Leave.eu were absolutely clear that
there was nothing clear about that referendum, Jonathan.
Well, I mean, there were certainly an awful lot of things that were said by the Remain campaign when we had the threats of things like the end of Western political civilization as we know it, threats of World War III, all that kind of thing, and all of those things were not helpful. When you had a Remain campaign that outfunded Leave because there was a government propaganda booklet, £10 million sent to every house in the country, so that the Remain campaign had amazing advantages over Leave, and yet the British people still chose to leave the European Union.
Okay,
so we
Jonathan,
need to make sure that actually happens, that we get control of our borders, that we stop spending money into the European Union budget, that we get control back of our courts.
Jonathan, we're going to go to the audience now. Jonathan Arnott, you've had your say. We're going to go back to the audience now.
Why would you want to put a cap on immigration when major establishments like the NHS were established for immigration, and most of this country was built up on immigration as well? It's a question I'd like to ask to the panel.
OK, well, it's very simple. You make sure that the people who come into the country are the people who bring the skills that we need to do the jobs that we need. What you don't have is a free-for-all, because a free-for-all means that the people who come in then may be unskilled people coming to work in sectors where you don't need that, and what that does, as the Bank of England research has shown, it causes wage compression, and it causes people to lose money. So immigration can be a good thing. Unlimited, uncontrolled immigration is a bad thing, and that's the distinction that you can only make if you end that free movement.
Simon Kitchen, Conservative Party, I haven't heard from you much this half hour. Tell us what the Conservatives are going to do with regards to Brexit. Brexit means Brexit. What does that mean?
Just told you what the Conservatives are going to do.
Can we?
Well, I mean, where are you on immigration?
I was going to go back to one of the education questions first, just because I didn't get a chance to respond. The lady here was talking about giving opportunities to people who can't afford to do internships, and we're introducing degrees within the workplace so people can work and earn and get those qualifications. So that hopefully within our manifesto we're definitely trying to address that issue. On Brexit, there's only two potential prime ministers and only two parties here who really will be able to kind of do these negotiations. There's Jeremy Corbyn, who doesn't even have the control of his own party and would have to do it in coalition with the Liberal Democrats that want another referendum, and also potentially with Sinn Féin as well. So this means that there's a cacophony of one side versus Theresa May and the Conservative Party. Now, I believe Theresa May is the right person to actually deliver this Brexit for a number of reasons. Firstly, she's one of the few leaders that actually has direct experience of negotiating in Europe. She did it as part of her Home Office brief, so she knows what the priorities are around the security areas.
She didn't even agree with Brexit, and yet she insisted on a hard Brexit. Why do you think that is? Is that a U-turn of U-turns?
She's not insisting on a hard Brexit at all. This is, I think, like most people in this country, we weren't 100% for leaving and 100% for remaining. It was in the balance.
We've heard a lot about Theresa May and the strong and stable, and Brexit means Brexit. Can you tell us about the question that was asked, which was immigration and the cap on immigration? What are you going to do? What are the Tories going to do?
Well, it's something to be negotiated, but what
does that mean?
Well, there's been two or three general elections now where the general public have voted for parties that have pledged to reduce immigration down to the tens of thousands, and that's something that we.
And you pledged that, and it hasn't happened.
Well, partly because we've been part of the European Union, it's difficult to make that commitment. We've made some very difficult, unpopular decisions around immigration outside of the European Union, and that is having an effect. We've just seen the recent figures come out which suggest that immigration is now coming down. But as part of this negotiation, we've been very honest and said, look, the most important thing is around getting control of our borders back, which is what people did vote for as part of the referendum. I must say, it was the actual Leave campaign that was the official Vote Leave, which was the official campaign, was very honest in saying, look, leaving the European Union does mean leaving the single market, leaving the customs union. So people did know what they were voting for.
OK, another question from the audience.
Hi, this is for UKIP. Seeing as your whole party policy and everything was to get the UK independent, it's even in your name, you've got that. Why are you still carrying on now, seeing as most of your policies mirror that of the Tories anyway?
Are you a busted flush?
Well, UKIP has always had a full manifesto. We're the party of direct democracy, of giving the people a greater say. We've always talked about getting power back from Brussels to Westminster, but that only works if you then take that same power away from Westminster and put it back in the hands of the great British people where it belongs.
It's just been taken over by the Conservative Party. Let's be honest, they've got the UKIP agenda now. We don't need UKIP and their divisive policies. And if I can just say an answer.
Would you care to name one of our divisive policies?
I'm going to answer the question that was asked. And the reality is it won't be Theresa May doing the negotiation. Do you all in this audience trust Boris Johnson to do the negotiation? Because I know I would rather have Keir Starmer, who has thought through in detail what we need to get out of the Brexit deal. And Labour have put the 6 tests down there about ensuring we have all the treaties in place, ensuring that workers' rights remain, sensibly thinking through what those policies need to be. And can I just say about the Lib Dems, because I'm fed up hearing about this in this election, they have some sort of collective amnesia. They were the first party to call for an in-out referendum. So you know what? The Lib Dems have as much responsibility for the difficulties that we're in with Brexit as anybody else.
This is from a Labour Party that ushed through Article 50 without protecting anything about EU citizens here.
You have to accept responsibility.
OK, let's go to the Green. Let's go to the Green Party and see what Jonathan has to say. Who would you like to see negotiate?
Years, the length of my career, really, I've had the freedom to live and work freely anywhere in Europe. And you guys won't have that if this happens. You won't be able to go and work in Europe. That'll mean emigrating, essentially. You won't have those rights. So I do think it's worth, just for a moment, reflecting on what we're all planning on losing here. Now, I also think it's important that we reflect on the tremendous value that migrants and immigrants bring to our country. Obviously, we know what importance they are to the NHS, but also our agricultural sector. In fact, the vast majority of low-paid jobs in this country are done by migrants coming to this country. That's actually just been recognised by the negotiators of Brexit. So now we've got a situation where people are backtracking on this 20,000 cap because we know that will be devastating for our economy. There's so much rubbish and nonsense here coming out of the wash as the negotiations and ideas progress. People having to backtrack all the time. I'm also extremely concerned about this great repeal bill that the government are proposing. So the idea being that they can sort of strike through the various pieces of European legislation that are actually very important to our country, both socially but particularly environmentally.
OK,
environmentally, our environmental legislation comes from the EU.
That takes us to climate change. Actually,
can I just correct him on something? He's actually just. It's a complete opposite of what the Great Repeal Bill is.
Simon Kitchen, Conservative.
It's about enshrining existing European law into British law.
It gives you
so
the
that
right
people
to
know, so people know what to expect, and that means it's easier for us to continue trading.
Let's
in
go
Europe.
and read it.
So we can amend the stuff that isn't working, but we can keep the stuff that is working. There's been no. And one of the things we've actually been very explicit about in our manifesto is continuing to protect workers' rights and actually extending them, but also that we're going to maintain the environmental regulations, those that work and that are obviously...
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about climate change. We've got a question from the audience.
Yeah, we've just mentioned climate change. My name is Michael Beattie. It's been hard in this election to hear anything about climate change, really, apart, like from anyone apart from the Greens, who you don't really hear a lot of. But it would be really interesting to hear, like, especially since, like, what Donald Trump's been saying in the last few days, how climate change is at the top of your party's agenda.
Your previous leader, Jonathan Arnott's just come out in support of Donald Trump, said it's refreshing to hear somebody say what they believe. Where are UKIP at on climate change?
Look, I certainly wouldn't support Donald Trump on absolutely everything. But what you need to do on the economy, it's not just about the single measure of CO2 emissions. You know, we've got to stop. We've got to stop doing all the things that we're doing, which are making things more difficult for our environment. So, for example, we've got to stop building our concrete.
3 minutes left. 3 minutes left. Lib Dems, Niall Hudson on climate change.
Yeah, well, three key Lib Dem policies are to actually put a lot more money into the renewable energy sector, but also to have a ban on diesel cars in the UK by 2025 and a ban on fracking. To be
Let's
quick.
go to Roberta Blackman-Woods. Thank you for being succinct, Niall.
Yeah. Similar policies to the Lib Dems. Actually, we are really frustrated in this election that we haven't been able to get climate change issues higher up the agenda, because we think it's really important that we address them and we continue to invest in renewable energy, for example. But I do think you have to ask a question: who would follow Donald Trump on anything, never mind climate change? We ought to be absolutely attacking him, tackling the issues that he's raising. He will put the world back decades in terms of addressing climate change, and we all have to ensure it's higher up the political agenda, and it's a great question. Thank you.
We've got a comment from the audience here.
Yeah, I'm Ethan Lawson Marshall. In the context of climate change, what will the parties do to kind of improve public transport links?
Simon Kitchen, Conservatives.
Brilliant. So, yes, just to confirm, we're Conservative Party is really proud in terms of being able to tackle climate change. We signed the Paris Agreement, so we're 100% behind it.
You put funding back into oil and gas exploration.
We want to...
And you were lukewarm about what Donald Trump did.
From the feed-in tariff to fund
also
gas
happy to admit that we're pro-fracking because it's cleaner than coal and it could lead to lower energy costs.
And coal.
And there's some really exciting times in terms of solar power coming online now, being cheaper than coal in many areas.
You destroyed the solar industry overnight.
Mate, could you be a little bit less rude and actually let other people speak?
Well, this is what happened.
So,
go on, Simon. Finish your point, Simon.
Yes, thank you. One of the things we're looking to do is to invest 1.6 billion in local transport and in cycling as well, which we think is really important. And looking at using digital technologies as well to allow people to be able to look at the kind of public transport links that are in their areas, so they might want to choose that first over obviously driving a car as well. And one of the things I'm particularly excited about, I haven't got one yet, I've never owned a car, but when I do own a car, I want to buy one of the nice Teslas or perhaps one of the Nissan electric cars. And that's one of the things as a party we're committed to doing, is to making us a world leader in electric cars. And it wouldn't be great to have them built here.
But why in the buses bill did you not allow local authorities to run local buses the way they do in London and create a much better local bus service?
Great question, Roberta, but sadly we are out of time.
Yes, thanks very much to the panel. To Simon Kitchen, Roberta Blackman-Woods, Niall Hodgson, Jonathan Arnott, Jonathan Elmer, and you, the audience. Applaud us out. You've been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Well, our wonderful Emma from Spark
Thank you.
It's 10 o'clock. Yes, I do, yeah.